As you said, here it is again. It's quite comprehensive presentation of the paranormal, and using historical persons, famous scientists, celebrities, and say funny anecdotes, and also presenting modern science, quantum physics, and other, say, perspectives from modern science, philosophy, and psychology, and avant-garde philosophy of mind that gives some sense how to understand and approach these phenomena. And personally, I think it's very valuable to because it gives you an expanded perspective on yourself and even perhaps your place in the world. It's the basic idea in the book is what I call the mental internet, and it's a metaphor for that consciousness, which we tend often to think is just inside our own head, is really a network between us all, connecting us all. And viewed that way, of course, a phenomenon like telepathy is no great problem at all, because if I have a thought, it's immediately, say, published online, and sensitive persons, what we call psychics, will be able to perceive these thoughts. And in the same manner also, as you can download information from the net, a psychic person or will be able to download lots of information from what I call the mental web, the collective consciousness connecting us all. And I take some stunning examples in the book, archaeologists having done very valuable finds by using clairvoyant persons that have directed them to the site where they should dig and that kind of things. So that is somehow, I would say, if each chapter more or less is centered around stories from one science. One is about history, one is about archaeology, one is about anthropology, one is about physics, and one is about psychology, and like that, just to have a kind of a framework for it. And scientists are usually quite respected people, good in thinking and good in observation. So I use stories mostly coming from scientists, and I feel that and hope that it lends the book some gravitas. It's not just old hippies on LSD telling their life stories and what they experienced while they were tripping. It's kind of more serious sources for the anecdotes here. So that is mainly the book, and it has been very well received. It has won a couple of awards in the US, Parapsychology Association Book Award, and also recently this spring it won a Nautilus Silver Award. So it is an award-winning book, and also the greats in parapsychology like Dean Radin, Stanley Krippner, Jeffrey Mislow, Jeffrey Kripal, and those great guys, most of them in fact have written endorsements for this book. So I think it's, if you're interested in these subjects, I think it's worthwhile to dig into it and see what you find there. It was some stories told. I was a member of a Christian youth club, and some of the members there told me strange stories about healing and telepathy and that kind of things. And because I trusted those people, I did not find any reason to disbelieve what they said. I just, okay, strange, interesting. And also later, a person said, my family, my aunt and uncle told about having a very strong telepathic connection on certain occasions. And even my grandfather, who was an engineer, machine engineer, and a very rational, down-to-earth person, told me that he was able to hear my grandmother arriving at the house about half an hour before it actually happened. And if my grandmother was late that evening, this kind of what we call premonition would appear later. And if she came home earlier, that premonition would come earlier, about half an hour before. So he became so used to that he started making dinner when that phenomenon appeared, because he knew that half an hour later she would come, and then they could have dinner together. So it became quite natural for him. So I was interested, because when you look at conventional psychology, they do not have really good explanation for these phenomena. They say it's just strange coincidences, and that's it, really. So I wanted to dig deeper. And also, when I studied at academia, University of Oslo, I got as mentor probably Norway's foremost expert on paranormal stuff and occultism and esoteric tradition, Professor Jan Erik Ebbestad Hansen. And he guided me to some interesting historical studies, Renaissance, Hermeticism, and also anthroposophy. And within these traditions, these phenomena are considered quite natural. So that somehow strengthened my idea that there was something here. And later, after, say, finishing my time at the university, I followed my personal interest and went also into parapsychology. And after some years in that and some stunning experiences with the clairvoyant people, long story, I got the idea for a book, and also a friend of mine, an experienced psychotherapist, told me, yes, you must write this book because it will be helpful for many people, because several of his clients were, say, relating such stories, but he had no framework to make sense of them. And he himself had also had kind of experiences like that. So he said, if you present something, say, sound and reliable in this field, you will help a lot of people to get a constructive and positive frame around otherwise, say, a bit confusing experiences. So he strongly urged me onto this. And it's a long and strange and a bit paranormal story, but I got scholarships, and I got out in Norwegian. I got good reviews by doctors in Norway, really, and I also get it out in English first on a little publishing house founded by an English quantum physicist, David Peat. And then and they're excellent people, but they did not have great distribution network. So therefore I contacted Watkins, which made a new and somewhat expanded version of the book, which is this we have here. So that is some essence history of the book. Well, they have also, as we said, Renaissance, Hermetism. They were quite aware of these phenomena, but we are then back several hundred years. So serious parapsychology, it would be, say, I think it's quite right to say it started in about 1880s with the Society for Psychic Research in London. Lots of academics, especially around Cambridge, was then engaging in, say, starting research on these phenomena. And really the elite of Victorian scientists and pioneers were in this club, SPR, Society of Psychic Research. And when the first Nobel prizes were started to handed out the coveted prizes, many of those ended up at mantelpieces of these guys in Society for Psychic Research. So it was a really scientific, serious interest. Then they felt that this was a field of expanding avant-garde science that really demanded us to say go in with full force and explore this field. So later on, it became a bit somehow say the fades, or what is called when things are getting, the fads, in psychology change. So it became what become the hottest topic, where behaviorism and the philosophy connected with that. And they wanted to reduce everything, and these phenomena, paranormal phenomena, they're quite messy and not easily to just say describe in a kind of limited way. You have to have an expanded view of consciousness to really make sense of them. And behaviorism is, as the name signals, more concerned about behavior, what you can observe and what you eventually can alter. So they have not really a place for that. But at an American Duke University, there was one guy somehow went against the stream, Joseph Banks Ryan. He was a biologist, and he started to do really say the really modern science about these things, modern statistic methods, working together with a famous mathematician to evaluate his experiments, all that. So SPR in England in the 1880s and Joseph Banks Ryan in US at Duke University in the 1920s are those who really make parapsychology into a rigorous science. Traditionally, they have done lots of the SPR. They collected stories. They went all over England and interviewed families, and typically they researched crisis telepathy, lots of other things, also levitation and apportation and all kind of strange things and ghosts and so on. But the main focus, I think it's fair to say, was a crisis telepathy, and that is the experience when you have a family member or friend being, for instance, abroad or at least in another town far away, and he or she suddenly has a crisis. It could be shock, it could be death, something, say, really upsetting happening to that person, and then you or family members of that person will perceive the same shock at the same time, even if there's no connection, no mobile phones. And so, as said, this was in the 1880s, they started to do research on that. And they collected many, many thousand stories from all over England. And then they went to those families who have experienced it and interviewed them, like in the court of law, and took, you know, sworn statements and from them, from the witnesses and all that. So they collected extremely lots of material around crisis telepathy and then documented these in a big tome. So a couple, I think it was in 2 tomes, really. I think the base material was 15,000 stories, if I don't remember wrong, just right here on. So that was the start. The focus on crisis telepathy was very important. Later, in Duke University, Joseph Banks Ryan, he did lots of card drawing, that you're supposed to draw cards hundreds and thousands of times and make guesses about those cards, which card would come next and so, and also try to, via telepathy, transmit those cards to other persons participating in the experiments. And also, yeah, lots of experiments with drawing of cards, really, and evaluating statistically whether or not you would hit more than one should expect from average. Modern parapsychology do lots of research of what they call a Ganzfield. Then you sit in a silent room with covering of your eyes, and you often try to say dampen all the sensory input, so you can be more in tune and be able to listen to the very subtle signals from, say, telepathy and clairvoyance. And you have, for instance, one experiment very common. You have one person in one room in laboratory and the other one in this dampened room where this just, you know, as little as possible sensory input as possible. So, and this other person trying to transmit images, and that will be famous images, typically Mona Lisa or the Parthenon, you know, or the Eiffel Tower, or, you know, things that have a strong visual identity. And so this person in this dampened room will try to somehow write down what kind of picture he or she feels is transmitted to him. That is one basic experiment. And the most modern things, they also use brain scans, fMRI, functional this magnetic resonance. So you scan the brain, so you can see also what's going on in the brain simultaneously, which part of the brain is activated when you do these experiments. So they use the latest equipment, and they have also very rigorous procedures for how they evaluate experiments. And contrary to common perception, that's think parapsychology is a woo or so on, really even many skeptical psychologists say that the experiment in psychology is easily at level with normal psychology when it comes to controls and the rigorousness. Chris French, for instance, he was editor of the British Skeptic magazine, and he says that most normal psychologists, they do not know this field. He knows it, and he says experiments are very high quality in general, and also that most normal psychologists, they are very uninformed and even quite bigoted with, say, prejudices against this field. So it's a strong science, not many dedicating their careers because the salary is lousy and the reputation is not, so you don't win a Nobel Prize doing your life's work in parapsychology. But for those interested in that, it's a frontier science that really can make you expand horizons, and also personally very, very gratifying. So if you are, say, ready to give up the outward prestige, I think you should say check out parapsychology as a possible career opportunity. The great famous, as we discussed before the program, the historian of science, Thomas Kuhn, says that what you have in what he called normal science is that people are doing their science within a very clearly defined field. You have a playbook, and it's not allowed to go outside the frames of this playbook. And whenever a person comes with a revolutionary science, that will meet opposition, because somehow you are challenging the basic assumptions of those doing normal science. For instance, Einstein, when he came with his theory, it was ridiculed, it was kept down, it was, of course, fiercely criticized because it broke with every normal perception of time and space and energy and the nature of light and gravity and so. So I think it was about 20 years Einstein had to fight to get acceptance for his theory, and then suddenly, you know, everybody is on the bandwagon. Oh, yeah, oh, it's great news and so. So I think it's what is very central in Kuhn's say description of history science is paradigm. That you have paradigms that somehow gives the premises for normal science and gives the playbook. When you try to do something that change the paradigm, you will meet lots of opposition, and there will be many years when you get more and more and more and more, say, frustration, anomalies, phenomena that do not fit with the old paradigm are heaping up and heaping up and heaping up, and suddenly, boom, it bursts, and then you get a new paradigm. But until that, say, moment, it will be lots of resistance, because people have their tenure for this old paradigm. They have scholarships, they have grants, they have students, they have written 20 books, say, confirming the basic assumptions of the old paradigm. So you are really asking them to give up their life's work to accept this new paradigm. So as I used to quote Max Planck, he was a pioneer in quantum physics. He said that science progresses funeral by funeral. So he thought these old scientists who had identified with the old paradigm, not in an aggressive way, but just silently and peacefully, had to die away. And then there will come new people with new ideas, being more open to see what is really there. And as also mentioned to you before we started here, in the most prestigious psychological journal in the world, American Psychologist, in 2018, there was an article. It's called, what is called adjustment, the experimental evidence for parapsychological phenomena. Review, and it's written by a Mexican professor tenured in Sweden, Professor Etzel Cardenia, and he is an excellent scientist, have written 300 peer-reviewed articles, and that the most prestigious psychological journal in the world takes in and gives space to an article confirming the existence of telepathy, clairvoyance, precognition, healing, and psychokinesis. That's really something that speaks volumes. So I feel that the avant-garde scientist, and Cardania is quite young, you know, at least middle age. So he is one of those, say, wall breakers for this new emerging science. And also within philosophy of mind, as I last year by the Nobel Prize winner in physics, that's Sir Roger Penrose, and he is not only a physicist, he is also a philosopher of mind. And together with this American anesthesiologist Stuart Hameroff, they have developed a new model of consciousness. It's usually called orchestrated reduction. And Hameroff has defended that their model of consciousness allows for telepathy based on what he called quantum non-locality. And also Sir Roger Penrose has said that probably the model allows for precognition. He had not done the math yet to see what more is allowed for, but at least precognition, he signals, is possible within their models. So if you have a Nobel Prize winner in physics that somehow at least is open to these phenomena, that is also something. And also in Cambridge, when I'm onto it here, there you have other Nobel Prize winner, Professor Brian Josephson. He won a Nobel Prize in physics in 1973, and he also defends telepathy and psychokinesis, moving matter with mind. And you can go to Brian Josephson's website on Cambridge University, and he will refer you to articles about this. So at least we have now 2 living Nobel Prize winners open for this expanded view of consciousness that I defend in my book. Yes, I can say many anthropologists have they go to for instance, to cultures in Amazonas, and suddenly they meet a shaman that can tell them how their flat in London looks like, you know. And because the shaman has never been to London, but still he mostly it's a he. There are some brujas also, but mostly it's a male thing. But not totally. The shaman will tell this anthropologist about family matters that's not known to other person and than the persons involved, and that kind of things. That has been experienced by many anthropologists, and they have also written in reports. And some of those reports are dismissed, and people have been reluctant to share it. But some within anthropology, especially some in the US, they have made a subdivision within the American Anthropological Society, where they study these kind of phenomena. So I mentioned that also in my book. So these experiences with, as I said, in the Amazonas, and also with Sami people, Swedish, a couple of Swedish researchers I mentioned, and also, of course, Aborigines in Australia, a very famous professor there. He was quite convinced that Aboriginals communicated via telepathy. When he went to a little village, they would know in advance that he was approaching, and they would also know what he would ask them about. So of course it's difficult to prove this, but his perception was that they had by telepathy picked up that he was approaching and what his question were. And also in the Bushman, Kalahari Bushman, very old culture, just like the Aborigines in Australia. There you have a professor from Louisiana University, Bradford Keeney. He has been living together with those people in the Kalahari Desert, and he also reports about specific experiences where they download information. It's not a written culture, so they don't have books and scripture really, but as Professor Keeney, who has written 20 books and a very acclaimed authority within counseling, he says that somehow they call it a classroom. They enter the classroom, and then the wisdom of the ancestors and all the information, how to use plant medicine, how to make beadwork and all things like that, is downloaded directly. So they don't need writing to transmit their culture. They use this, say, collective consciousness as a classroom. So my passage about Bushmen in the book is called Pioneers in Web-Based Education. So they have a very active relation to this collective sphere, the mental internet. And as I said, many anthropologists from so many cultures have made reports about these things. So and somehow seeing is believing. So if you have experienced these things several times yourself, it's more difficult to deny the reality of it. partly is because of the limited models on from natural science in that specific period when modern natural science was born. As I do quite a number of in the book, modern models, I launched 5 modern models based on quantum physics that are open to these phenomena. But say the classical Newtonian physics will say that space is this and time is this and causality and this, and we know everything about this, and therefore these phenomena have no place. But as I said, models from quantum physics are much more open, and many quantum physicists are interested in consciousness and these phenomena and had done research on them also. As I said, my book first was launched by a publishing house founded by a quantum physicist. But back to the indigenous people, as I said, they do not have these unnecessarily limiting models that people that want to be scientific very often adapt, you know, because they're afraid of everything they do not understand. They somehow, you know, what is called, you know, cling to these limited models. And also lifestyle. If you are living, say, I used the example, if you are out on the tundra with your reindeer, herding the reindeer, you know, during nighttime, it's just quiet and it's snow and it's the moon, you know, and it's totally different frame of mind. You are somehow on a different wavelength and frequency. So I think the traditional lifestyle of indigenous people all over the world are much more, say, disposes much more for being able to perceive this. But if you're living in metropolis and there are lots of cars all around and TV in every so on, and people beeping on your mobile phone all the time, of course it's disturbing. It's like hearing a tiny little flute within a big symphony orchestra. It's very difficult to discern this, and also in a metropolis with all this noise, it's difficult to somehow pick up the subtle vibes of telepathy and clairvoyance, which, as I said, therefore, because of the lifestyle, is much more available to indigenous people in general. Also, they often have cultures to somehow heeding these phenomena, to take it seriously and dedicate time to learn this from childhood. At least the Sami culture used to have that. As I said, both lifestyle and tradition for culture makes indigenous people typically more open to these things. So yes, we have lost something in the West here, I think, but we can gain it back. Famous astronomer and ufologist Jacques Vallée has made a point of that. You have, say, UFO observation in the Middle Ages, and he's written, I think it's 4 books about this historical aspect of these things. And I think one was in Germany in 13th century, and then some people described a ship in the skies, you know, starship, would we say, of course. They did not have the technology to refer to. They could not call it a moonraker or satellite or anything, so they used ship, you know. So probably what you are able to see is to some extent limited by the cultural framework and outlook. So that's correct. Yes, but still, in the Bible, I will not go into too much crypto things here, but you know, you have the famous vision of Ezekiel in the Bible, Old Testament, and he describes a big wagon with big wheels and, you know, in flaming glow, and also you have this wagon taking up Elijah directly to heaven, and then you have fire and all these storms. It could be UFO observation, or it could be people on acid. I will not go into that because that's open to many interpretations, but at least you find UFO observation in many cultures, but probably then described in what language were available to them, not of course in modern technological language. And as you talking about USO, probably you know, Pentagon has just released a report about UFOs, and they have 144 cases, and they only found that one of those cases was able to be explained by conventional means. So that leaves us with 143 cases from Pentagon saying that these cannot be readily explained by conventional models on perception. So that's something really. So could be one sign that we are more open to that. It's somehow I feel we are goldfish in a bowl discussing whether or not there is a life or a world outside the bowl. And these UFO things are some indications there are life outside this bowl. And also the phenomena that I discuss in my book, Telepathy, Clairvoyance, and so, also is an indicator, at least, that the bowl is not the end of the world in a way. Some people, you know, they have quite a lot of telepathic experiences and clairvoyance, but they don't recognize it for what it is, really. And for some people I know, it's just so matter of fact that they don't think of it as paranormal. It's just intuition or gut feeling, you know. So they don't label it as paranormal. So they don't feel there is any, and because they're not into science, say natural science, they don't feel it's a breach of any kind of natural law either. So they just accept it, and the guys steer by it, you know. There was a big, what's it called, in a guy in construction in Oslo, a friend of mine told about, he get visions of little mice telling him what to do, you know, and he's not psychotic in any way, and he's running a successful big firm, but when the mice instructed him to do this and this, he followed their advice. So what is this? It's so difficult to explain, you know, but somehow it was a connection to his deeper level of mind, and for some reason his subconscious have chosen mice as a symbol. So there are many strange ways that very normal people see interact with this field of extended information. And also some people have, as I used, I discussed with you before the program, this, you can have auditive signals, you can have visual signals, that's typical, and you can have gut feeling, and you can even have olfactory feelings. This does not smell good. Oh yes, you know. So you use all of your sensory repertoire to somehow, it's possible to use all your sensory repertoire to say fetch information from this extended field of consciousness. So you just have to learn to, what is my primary language? How can I deal with it? How can I develop that into a more, say, trustworthy and open channel? And in my chapter 9 here, I discuss intuition quite a lot. And there's normal intuition. If you are an experienced driver, you intuitively know what to do when you come in a traffic jam, you know, and because you have stored experiences in your subconscious. But the question is, of course, is all intuition just based on earlier experiences you capitalize on? Or could it be information coming also from this extended field of consciousness? I make a hopefully strong case for that intuition is also, it's a kind of seamless synthesis between experience and also extended consciousness. I use example, a famous psychologist in the US, she experienced that she had Elizabeth Lloyd Mayer. She was working at Berkeley, professor, and she experienced that her daughter, they had a harp, valuable harp, and that was stolen, and she was not able to get it back, and contacted police, and they had not had any reports on it, and so after some months she more or less gave up, and then a friend of her told her, why don't you contact the dowser, you know, guy or woman using pendulum, and that is, as I said, you can visual, auditive, gut feeling, and pendulum, or tarot card, or crystal ball, you know. So it's just a means to how to connect with this information. And he quite, his name was McCoy. He was the chairman of American Doser Association, a former military man. And she sent her a map. She sent him a map and also a photograph of the harp that had been stolen. So he sat in his home in Arkansas, far away from where she was living, and he dozed over the map and found an address and made an X and sent back the map to her. And to make a long story short, she went to that place and set up a little poster, you know, do anyone have information about a harp looking like that? And she got some response, got a research warrant from the police, and went to this flat in the building on the address where the X was from the dowser, and there was the harp. So clearly that is not based on earlier experience. This guy have never been to that particular place. He was sitting in an other town, just dowsing over the map, you know. But if you use the model of consciousness that I use, the mental internet, of course, the information about the harp's whereabouts had been uploaded. The thief, of course, knew where the harp was because he had hidden it there. So with his thoughts, feelings, experiences, he had uploaded the necessary information that the very sensitive doser was able to detect. So that is a type of intuition that cannot be used to just being a good driver of having lots of life experience and that kind of. That is the intuition when we connect with the bigger field of consciousness. I'm capitalizing quite a lot on that idea because Jung is, say, the first person in a modern scientific way describing this field of consciousness as a collective thing, but it's a very old idea. So Jung is also just, say, passing on the relay baton from earlier generations, because if you go back to all Indian Vedanta philosophy, you will find this idea of consciousness as being a cosmic thing. Also in Buddhism, you know, the mind is really the basic stuff of the universe. It's ever present, ubiquitous. So it's more like that matter is a condensed mind in a way, you know, just like ice is frozen water. In a way, matter is frozen mind. So mind is somehow the basic stuff in the universe. So from that perspective, everything is already connected, and all consciousness is by nature collective. So Jung is just capitalizing on this old tradition, and also in alchemy, in Stoicism, and Hermeticism, and so it's a very old tradition. But Jung formulated the concept collective unconscious, and I used to make the thoughts available to modern folks. I use mental internet because every day we have the experience of transmitting information in a split second to other parts of the world, and also downloading much of information. So we know that is in principle possible. So to somehow relate it to our everyday experience, I use the mental internet. I think that's a good metaphor, because earlier I thought of mental radio and like that, but you know, it's not just a radio transmitting thing, it's also a storehouse. So that also Jung said that all our earlier generations experiences are really uploaded and available in this. It's an extremely storehouse, big storehouse of information. And that also, as I also discuss in chapter 9, probably you have lots of books of him in your cafe, Rupert Sheldrake, famous biologist from Cambridge. He thinks that this is the way evolution in nature happens, because the earlier generations of animals and plants and all living beings, they are continuously uploading information from their life in these collective fields. He calls it more that process morphic resonance. So there will be a, say, process of uploading by experience and then downloading, and when that process happen over millions of years, say the store bank of information gets bigger and bigger, and therefore we got more and more complex organisms. So that is his take on evolution, and I feel that is a very interesting way that goes very well together with the model of telepathy, and also with this old Indian idea of consciousness as ubiquitous, as being the basic stuff of the universe. That is, of course, a philosophy you do not need to subscribe to observe and enjoy these phenomena. But I think it could be a very constructive and relevant framework. Synchronicity is same-timedness. It's meaningful coincidences, and it's a subjective experience. But Jung found the concept was launched by Jung. He found that somehow. Yeah, it's a lot to make it simple. When people go deep into their personal processes, they tend to without them really knowing it, doing it consciously, the subconscious mind tend to organize meaningful coincidences. That you met this person at exact that moment and you are going to the library and suddenly a book falls down from the upper shelf and it's just what you was looking for, and it's kind of coincidences. And Jung felt that these were orchestrated from the subconscious mind. And the first book he wrote about this, it is called Synchronicity, really, and he wrote it together with this Nobel Prize winner in physics, Wolfgang Pauli, very famous physicist, quantum physicist, who himself had experienced lots of paranormal phenomena. So Jung wrote about, say, the psychological aspects, and Pauli wrote about the physical aspects. So, and what their, say, main thought was that we divide very strictly between matter and mind. But what they thought that was beneath this, there's a level of unity. So what we say, just like here I have one finger and another finger, but oh, it's the same hand, you know. So it's the same bloodstream running in all the fingers. But from that perspective, you just see the fingertips and not that they are connected. So it's matter and mind, but basically there's a unity if you have an expanded consciousness. So that was their take of it. So if you go deep in your personal process, you connect with this deeper level, and therefore you also tend to orchestrate things spontaneously in the physical world. I can give you one example. The writing of this book, really. A friend of mine, he says, you have to write a book about the book because it happens so lots of synchronicities with it. I was about 10 years ago, I had very little money and I needed to do something, get a grip on the situation. And there was two options that stood out to me. I could apply for what he called a student loan, which is very easy to get in Norway. As long as you register as a student, you get this loan and even get some of it as kind of scholarship, you know. So it's an easy way to money. You can't go on forever with it, but you know, you mostly will get some substantial amount for studying subjects at the university. The other way was the long and winding road, writing a book. And that's much more difficult, and difficult to get scholarship. And, you know, you never know if the book is going to be successful and so on. So I was pending, should I go to the university and apply for a student loan, or should I start writing a book and hope to get a scholarship for the book? And I was meditating over that 2 months, 3 months, you know. I was really thinking, should I do this, should I do that, should I do this, you know, pondering, and not just with my mind, but, you know, feeling, because somehow it was engaging for me, and it's two quite different roads to enter. So, but being a kind of lazy person, you know, I ended up, I said to myself, oh no, writing to book is too much. I just apply for the student loan. So I sent an SMS to the phone company and asked for the phone number to Lånekassen, which is the bank in Norway that will give you a student loan. But when the answer from the phone company came back, it was not the phone number to the student loan bank, but it was the phone number to the Writers Guild. And, you know, it's crazy. And I thought, okay, I've been thinking about, could I have mixed up, you know, and sent other question than I thought, you know, was I tired when I sent it? And I went to my outbox in the phone to what I have sent, and I saw I'm asking specifically, please send me the number to the student loan bank. And what I'm getting back from them is the phone number for the Writers Guild. So that's a synchronicity. And I took the hint, and I applied for scholarship from the Writers Guild. Didn't get the first round, but second round I got. And then the rest is history. History here. Yes, and my interpretation of that is, of course, that because I was so engaged in this process, I have activated deeper layer in my subconsciousness. And I think often we come to kind of crossroads in life, and one say road is more right for us than the other. And I think my subconsciousness felt that writing this book was more right for me than just the easy way out and being a lazy student and living off loaned money, you know. So I feel that my subconsciousness somehow directed me in whether or not it's a higher religious wisdom, also that my higher self or the Lord or some karmic aspect. That's too theoretical for me, but at least so directly, I think it's all the energy I put into the subconscious, and that's what should I do, what should I do, what should I do for 2 or 3 months. Then I got this answer. But you got to be dedicated. I think it's just if you not have a kind of strong question, you will not likely to get a strong answer. So as I said, this was very important for me, and I used a couple of months, 2-3 months, being very, say, delved down in this. So if a person is really engaged in say, important matters for him or her, then every person, I think, will tend to create these kind of meaningful coincidences, and that can serve as a guidance or a compass for you. But of course, you have to also be discerning to see what is just fanciful thinking. And so I read a story once, for some reason, a woman was always seeing red plastic buckets all over the place, and she was for some reason feeling that she had to collect all these, and she bought, you know, red plastic buckets, and you know, it's just figments, and so you have to be also discerning and listening and be very say grounded also in that process. But it's we are all magicians basically, because we are all connected to this collective field. Some people, of course, as I often compare with musicality, some people are more musical than others, and some people are more in tune than others. But from say the place you are, it's possible to develop a more connected and more open to this kind of information. It's not magic in the, say, limited way. It's a common magic that we all have access to. But as I said, you got to be dedicated. You know, Richard III, Shakespeare, my kingdom for a horse, this king. And he had been disappeared since was it the 15th century, you know, and his skeleton was never found. And then there was this society, Richard III Society. They have felt that Richard III was unfairly, you know, tainted by Tudor propaganda. You know, Henry VIII and Elizabeth and all those guys coming. So he was a different branch of a royal family, and they somehow to solidify their own power, they talked shit about Richard III. So there was a Scottish screenwriter, Philippa Langley, and she was also an amateur historian, and she was, I think she was leader of this Richard III Society, and she was had a general idea about where Richard could be buried. So she had asked some archaeologists, but you know, no one didn't know anything for certain, and there was some stories about his body being placed in the Greyfriars Church, but also stories about his body being thrown in the river. So nobody really knew. So she went to a parking spot in Leicester, where this Greyfriars Church once, or monastery, once had laid, and she was walking on, say, the common parking space, and she felt it was totally dead. But there was a kind of chain and into a private, say, area of this parking place, and she went over that chain, and suddenly she knew intuitively. It was midsummer, but she got the chills, you know, and she knew, I'm standing on the grave of Richard III. And because she was quite resourceful and well connected, she managed to organize an archaeological excavation. And lo and behold, 1 meter, 3 feet under exact spot where she had stood, they found a skeleton. And this skeleton was DNA tested against living relatives from Richard III's sister, Anne of York. And it was found to be a 99.9999 match. which means, of course, this skeleton was really Richard. So, and so he was, with pomp and circumstances, interred in the Cathedral of Leicester some years after, and Philippa got, you know, was what is called this MBA, or what is called when you got the nobility from the Queen for the exhumation of and discovery on the exhumation of Richard. So that is a very modern and very stunning example of how intuition can guide you to do finds that would not be possible by any. So of course you could dig up the whole area. I used 2 years of that with you know, bulldozers and all that, but that seems to like finesse. Much better to use clairvoyance, as Philippa Langley did. The palace of Cleopatra, the famous Egyptian queen, was found by a team of psychic archaeologists down in Alexandria in the 1980s. I write about that as well. There was Stefan Schwartz. He is an anthropologist and also psychic archaeologist, and he teamed up with 11 psychics, and they did spectacular finds. And one of those finds was the palace of Cleopatra. So that is also quite you know, historically important find, and it's documented by camera, and everything is filmed, so it's not just he making up stories. So that is two quite stunning stories from archaeology. And also I start the book with a very famous story by Abraham Lincoln, American president, because 3 days before he was shot in the theater, he had a dream. And, you know, it's chilling to read this dream. I really should have read it. I don't suppose we have time to read this dream now, but it's a dream where he somehow walks into the White House, and he hears sobbing and crying all over the place. And in this dream, he went over to the eastern section, and there suddenly he sees a catafalque, and there is a corpse wrapped in linen on this catafalque, and he demands from one of the guards there, who is this? And the guard says, it's the president. He was shot by an assassin. And 3 times later, he went to the theater and was shot by an assassin. You know, so that is Abraham Lincoln, and it was recorded by his good friend and partly also a biographer. So lots of kind of that stories. So the theoretical aspects of the book is very interesting, just to make it's possible to be a rational person and be open to this. But I would say the main bulk of the book is these kind of stories, and hopefully written in a funny way also. So thank you, Carl, for having me.